And to a close. All right, so I'll be honest, when I guess I didn't preface this, but I had the chance to actually go through a very social studies specific variation of this professional development all of last year. And I very much wanted to bring in a lot of that content, which we did. But one of the things that really was a struggle for me was this component. And I really felt, even having gone through that, digging into this article that Laura found really made things clear to me. So how did this article work around this whole idea of complexity versus difficulty? And I'd like to hear maybe some of your thoughts. I'm not going to go table to table, but I did ask one person to share because I heard a very great conversation. But if others, I'd like to hear what was going on at other tables as well. So if you don't mind.
So we had a really great discussion in the previous activity about where classifying a painting would go. To quote a colleague who teaches art, I classified as a 3 because I knew none of you all could do it. But we were really like, what is the level of thinking it's asking? So we debated. We didn't finalize it. We just put it back in the bag.
Okay. Very good. Very good.
And so then after reading this article, it really cemented for us that what it was asking was a level 2 because it's difficult to
Right.
do. Just like memorizing more information, talking about the states and when they were adopted. That's more difficult for people to do. But is it challenging in the complexity of level of thinking? And so we said that we struggle with that.
It isn't, but if you were to tweak the question being asked of the student rather than just classifying, asking them to defend that or why,
Sure.
or then
Sure.
you could put it to a 3, but at that level of questioning, it
Sure.
really is, even though it would be difficult and a lot of students would say, and a lot of people would say, I don't have enough background knowledge or whatever, the difficulty is there, but not the complexity.
Sure. And I think, too, in what you just shared, I think a lot of times in application, we're kind of assuming that students, so if we ask them to classify something, we're assuming they're classifying it with evidence because we are kind of internally doing that. Whereas we need to be more descriptive in saying, okay, why have you put this here versus, all right, you've got them all in the right categories, good job. And maybe it was just that they slid it over to the right category.
Right. Well, being more mindful in your questions so that when you're asking, what we're asking our students to do can be complex instead of trying to make it more difficult and staying at the one level.
Right.
I mean, just being mindful of what are we asking them
Right.
to do.
Because it's much easier to make it more difficult than making it more complex. You really have to review what you're actually asking.
Right. Great. Great. Thank you. Other things that came up or from that conversation that sparked some thoughts you want to share?
We kind of came up with a new question regarding the states and when they and the capitals, because we kind of worked through that whole difficulty versus complexity question. So we said, well, why not ask the students, make a prediction of why the capital is located where it's located within the state. So that's a lot more complex. It's not necessarily more difficult. Maybe it's actually less difficult, but it's way more valuable to the student to make predictions about
Sure.
why that would be located there, and then you could research that. You know, I mean, you could do a whole bunch of different things with that type of question.
And by less difficult, you mean it's harder to memorize a bunch of things versus understanding the context of why it would be located strategically, knowing more about the geographics of why places are located where they are and so designated. Interesting. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. Yes, please. Yeah.
We're talking about building that stamina
Mm.
because the amount of time, okay, with something as simple as vocabulary and talking. Now, since we find it at Lower Allen Way, the value of talking, of talking about any one thing, is not there with a lot of kids that we have because we don't feel like probably there's a lot of dialogue at home.
Okay.
There's no practice.
Okay.
They're used to being told what to do as opposed to thinking for themselves.
Mhm.
And the value of conversation is so quickly known. You know, anytime you try to talk certain kids immediately tune out. That is, they don't know how to do it, they don't want to do it, there's no value in it, they haven't learned, and kind of learning maybe how to manipulate the kids socially to value that dialogue and the stamina, that it would require them to have that same conversation with themselves to get through a certain math problem.
Okay.
They'll probably give up long before they get there, you know?
So are you thinking of like what are questions we could ask that would help kids get into that? Or you're talking about I'm not sure, are you talking to the importance of oral language in solving it and them being able to engage in that?
Probably.
Okay. So you are kind of asking a question. I just am trying to clarify. That power of conversation, and maybe that comes a little from gradual release and getting into those kinds of moves or pieces. But I think the power of, I hear that a lot around the perseverance piece. How are kids, when faced with these more complex tasks, how are they able to persevere through that, and what does that look like? And I know that's something that we're certainly struggling with. Did you?
So it's interesting that you would say that. I had an opportunity, we had some PD last week with, we're doing a lot of conversations with Cassia Weidekin. She wrote this book called Math Exchanges. And she teaches in a district that is high ELL, Title I kind of place down in Virginia. And so what she actually works with her kids, like on some of the more rigorous like word problems that have a lot of structure to them that could be challenging for students, is she actually does a little bit of ELA work with them. And before they even solve the problem, they work on just retelling it. And so sometimes they don't even put the numbers in the problem. If they're talking about, she works a lot with K2 kids, but she'll say, if the word problem is something about there were 6 birds on the lawn, and then there was a loud noise and 4 birds flew away, how many birds are left? She'll actually leave the numbers off, and the kids will actually just work through the actions of what's happening before they have to solve it. So they become used to doing what I assume ELA folks do, just understanding what the actions are within the word problem before they solve it. So they'll do that a bunch of times before she puts numbers in, and then they actually solve it, so that they start to build some of that stamina of, the first thing I have to do is figure out what's happening within this before I set about pulling my numbers out and solving it. So it was an interesting strategy for me to hear, because I don't know that I ever did that with my kids when I was teaching math. So.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. And it sounds like, just from what you were sharing, that it was as powerful for a lot of you as it was even for me, having gone through that, just to help make it so simple and short. So thank you, Laura, for finding that. Okay, so a couple other quick things as we're kind of heading into this piece. We're going to go back now and kind of revisit some of the things, but understand with level 4, there is extended time, but it's not the only factor. So time is not the only factor to consider. And so this goes through and kind of shows some of the different tasks and the type of thinking that then goes in with that. So it isn't just about that component of extended time, if you will. Okay, so what I'd like to do is go back to our Little Red Riding Hood question. Remember, we had our first question, and then we reanalyzed our question. So what I'd like you to do now is consider, if you look at that question and you've done analysis of different statements or tasks, and now you've got your own example to kind of use from, the one that you created, see if you can figure out where that maybe fits in our matrix here. And you can use the matrix that we've provided for you to help give insight, but where would you fit that question? And maybe where would you fit your first question? And then where would you fit the question that you reworked? So remember, we said, give us a comprehension question around Red Riding Hood. And I think over here, jokingly, I heard, what is the moral of the story? Perfect. So then if that was the question, then see where that one fit. Well, then when you went to rework the question, take that question and see where that fits in the matrix. Okay? So I just want you to take something you did from before and just see, when you did that without having this other information in front of you, what it is that you generated and where it fit. And this will just be a couple-minute activity, so go back and revisit those questions and put them into the matrix. Are there any questions that you have? All right, go ahead.